Hoodoo plant mamas, get your soul fed and your spirit read.
This here ain't no trend. I possess the power from way back when. Back when folk were stripped from all of their kin, so they had to find the magic within. So I call on my ancestors and gather my herbs. I conjure at my altar. Hoodoo plant mama. I manifest growth and I release trauma.
Child, we just out here trying to water our plants and mind our business, you know? Everybody ain't from the deep south, man. Everybody can't have culture like us.
Hey y'all, and welcome back to another episode of Hoodoo Plant Mamas. I am your co-host, Leah Nicole.
And I'm Dani B.
And today we get to talk to Hari Ziyad. But before we do that, Dani B, how are you doing?
I'm doing okay. Right now, I'm super tired. I don't know. I think it might be the rain. It's like officially kind of fall. And so it's been cloudy and it's raining. And I just want to, I got my cashmere candle lit. And so I really just want to be laying down, chilling. Not even, I don't even know if I would be sleeping. I just want to just lay down and rest, literally. So I'm doing okay. A little gloomy, but I'm here. How about you?
Yeah, I feel that. It's raining here too. And it's been like a very soggy September. I know like I wanted to start fall gardening. I even talked about it a little bit on the Patreon, and I've just kind of had to wait until it dries up. Hopefully, I'm hoping that October will be a bit kinder to me and that I'll be able to put my seeds in the ground. But yes, I'm super excited about that.
I like the sound of that. Well, let's get into some gratitude. What are you thankful for this week?
I know in our last episode I talked about just kind of being at a standstill with writing, but recently I got a little bit of inspiration. So I'm grateful for that inspiration. I'm grateful for the direction, and I'm just grateful to be writing again. What about you? What are you grateful for?
I didn't really think about it today, but I guess I'm grateful. Yeah, I'm thankful for myself today. I'm thankful for friends and, you know, everything's been a little weird, but I'm here. I'm thankful to be here. All right, well, let's get into some ways to support the Hoodoo Plant Mamas podcast. You can follow us on social media. We're on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. You can also rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. To monetarily support our podcast, you can join our Patreon. We have a $2 tier for those who want to give every month to show their support. And then our $5 all access tier includes monthly minisodes, card pools, and plant content. Also, we got a new patron recently. Thank you, Ari, for becoming a patron. We're so excited to have you.
Yes, thank you, Ari. If you prefer a one-time donation, you can give any amount you want on Cash App, #, Hoodoo Plant Mamas, or PayPal, hoodooplantmamas@gmail.com. We also want to thank you, Julia, for your donation last week. If anyone is interested in sponsoring an episode, feel free to email us at hoodooplantmamas@gmail.com. We especially want to work with Black, Indigenous, POC-owned, and queer-owned businesses. Let's get into this interview. So today we are joined by Hari. Hari, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name is Hari Ziyad. I am a writer, screenwriter, and author, a journalist, author of Black Boy Out of Time, which is a memoir about growing up Black queer in Cleveland. I'm sure we'll talk more about that. And yeah, that's where I'm from, Cleveland, but I currently live in Brooklyn. And I'm really excited to be joining you
Yes,
all.
we're excited you are joining us. Yes, we did want to talk about Black Boy Out of Time. And so my first question is something that I loved was your discussion or your exploration of religion. So you talked about your father and that he said, God is whatever helps us get to self realization, regardless of the road you take. And you talk about how both of your parents kind of moved away from Christianity to these different religions, your father to Islam, your mother and your grandmother to Hare Krishna. And they both did it kind of in the hopes of finding a more liberating religion. But you argued that there is no religion that has saved Black people in the colonized world. So I'm kind of wondering, like, how did you arrive at Hoodoo? And do you think it has
Hmm.
saved or comforted you in this colonized world?
Yeah, so much of what my parents did in their own exploration set me up for my journey. I see it as like an extension of what they were doing. Like you said, they both were born and raised Christian. My mother, in particular, did this long journey through various religions with her mother, and like you said, there was about them trying. I think this is, I mean, these are some of this is things that I was reading into their journey, but I think that they were trying to find something that felt more free to them, and so they arrived. My mother as into Hare Krishna religion, which is a version of Hinduism, and my dad is Muslim, and they did a lot of interfaith work to that end. And then as I explore in the book, there was still a lot of even though that was really freeing in the sense of like we grew up knowing that we didn't have to practice like people around us in our community, which allowed us um, to explore and to push the limits of the constraints that are generally around Black children and what's available to them. There still was a lot of, in particular, homophobia that was a part of the way that they practice. And I think that that limitation is in seeing that even in contrast to the freeing ways that they practice, um, kind of pushed me to think maybe there's something more. Um, and so that idea that there could possibly be something more is what really led me to trying to explore hoodoo and African traditional religions, because I think the ways that homophobia in particular were adopted by my parents was kind of a reflection of the fact that these were still not religions um, that could hold space for them and for us as full Black people. And I think the only way to do that, for me at least, is to go as far back as I can towards the religions of our ancestors. And I love the fact that hoodoo kind of facilitates a lot of continuing that path that my parents did. Like I don't have to throw away all of the stuff that they learned, all of the things that still benefit me from that practice. I can incorporate that into my journey too. And so that's what I'm trying to do. There's still a lot that I take from, in particular, Hinduism, and use that, in my altar work. In particular, after my mother passed away, that there's still a lot that I communicate through. That's the language that she knew. So yeah, that's how I ended up here. Sorry, that was like a long, circuitous way of explaining that, but yeah, and it's still a journey. I'm definitely by no means an expert on hoodoo or anything, and I'm still taking it day by day. And to answer the second part of your question, I do feel like it's much more liberating, and I do feel a lot freer
Mm,
um, as I continue this practice.
yes. I love that. And I do agree with what you have to say. I have felt like I can incorporate kind of the things that I learned in the church into hoodoo, but it's a lot more accepting of who I am, like fully, instead of like I have to be a certain way under this
Hmm.
religion. So yes. So a term that you define in your book is misafropedia. And so we had an episode last season called Children is Divine. And we kind of talked about this, I don't want to say full hatred, but it's like this devaluing of
Hmm.
children, specifically Black children. And so you wrote that Misafropedia creates monsters out of Black children for simply existing. So I was wondering, could you elaborate more on what that term is and how maybe we can begin to move away from Misafropedia in an anti-Black world?
Yeah, so misophopedia is a term that I crafted. Misopedia is a word that just means the hatred of children. And I was inspired a lot by Moya Bailey and the way that she coined the term misogynoir, which really facilitated, I think, a streamlining conversations around how the intersection of Blackness and womanhood affects Black women in particular. And so obviously we know, at the intersection of childhood and Blackness too, that there's a specific way that Black children move and are received in this world. And I think it's really central to name that. And I think that, at least for me, my work starts there. And so I wanted to have a term that defined the way that Black children are devalued, the ways, that the school to prison pipeline operates in particular around Black childhood, the way that Black children are precluded from notions of gender, and to being just in general free to explore themselves and come into themselves. And so I used, just added Afro into that to name Black children in particular. And I I needed to start there too, because when I was writing the book, I was thinking through all of these ideas without using that term, but I realized that, all of the traumas that I was working through, this book really to me was about healing through, different traumas of being Black and queer, and in particular growing up in my family. But it all led back to childhood, and it all led back to the ways that you denied access to being a child. And so I posit that that's the case for Black people in general, that the ways that childhood is denied from us is really central to the types of traumas that we hold. And it's healing through that requires, allowing Black children to be free, and getting connected to the childhood aspects of yourself as an adult, and healing through the childhood trauma. And so to answer the second part of your question, how do we start to do that? I think for me, it's recognizing, that we still have access to our childhoods even as adults. And so I did a lot of inner child work in that book, which was really central to my healing process, because I thought for a long time, I'm not a child anymore. Like, so that's gone. Whatever experiences that I've had, I'm so disconnected from that. And Hoodoo really was the starting point of thinking, that we don't have to think about time so linearly. Um, and so once you stop thinking of time so linearly, it opens up an opportunity to reconnect to your childhood in a different way. And so I think on a personal level, doing that inner child work is really helpful and really healing, but also, engaging with actual children too, and making sure that we're not perpetuating those cycles of violence that contribute to misafropedia, that contribute to them not being able to exist fully in this world, is, I think, the starting point for a lot of our liberation work.
I love that, and I love how you center like Black childhood in your work. Um, I'll say I've been super resistant to the idea of inner child work. Like it's just something like before I even knew that that's what it was, I was like, it's certain stuff from my childhood. I'm not interested in going back there. Like I avoid it. Um, but I really love the notes and prayers to your childhood self that you incorporated in the book, and the reckoning with the ways we internalize misafropedia even in childhood and wield it against our peers. Something I have had to work through. It was like so much that I was like resonating with, because have I have carried resentment from other Black children into adulthood,
Mm.
to this day, that I'm still working through. And so a few months ago, I feel like I keep bringing this up, and Leah has probably heard it a bunch of times that I talked about this feeling of wondering if our past selves, our inner children, like linger like spirits. And like when you're like really going through it and trying to avoid all those demons, it's like they're just floating around, like begging you to like talk to me, nurture me, do all these things that I needed. And so I was wondering, like, could you describe the experience of like not only writing back to your inner child, but also reckoning with your own internalized misafropedia, which you do a lot in the book. But I was reading it and I was like, wow, like I can't imagine that experience because of how much you really have to like dig into
Mhm.
that part of yourself. And so, yeah, could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and I really resonate with you saying, that you had trouble with inner child work. And I touch on it a little bit in the book, but I definitely did too. But what I realized, and that's why Hoodoo was so helpful to me, for me at least, that resistance felt so similar to the resistance I had around ancestor work at first. In particular, there are some ancestors that I have really fraught relationships with, and I know you all talk about this a lot in your podcast. Working through that and realizing that that work is going to be difficult, and all of those fears and things are real. Um, uh, Being able to work through that in my altar work, um, in particular around my grandmother, is what prepared me to do some of the work that I was resistant to do around inner child. And so I definitely believe also, that those parts of us do function like spirits. And I think that that work parallels a lot. And even if you don't do inner child work, the way that it's clinically prescribed in therapy or something, I think we can do that work, and take a lot of what we learned from working with ancestors to do that work. Um, I probably got more from doing that and practicing my spirituality than I did in my actual therapy sessions. And so that is kind of what that process was like. It felt a lot like the difficult conversations I was trying to have with my grandmother. It felt a lot like honoring the parts of me that were resistant and questioning those, and not just pushing those away, and those are really real, and figuring out where that came from, and being gentle with myself as I did that. Like, you don't have to dive into your deepest traumas the first time you start doing inner child work. um, so yeah, that was kind of what that process was like. And as a writer, it made it easier. At first I was having a lot more problems just speaking to that part of me, and so like putting that on paper was really helpful. um, and so yeah, a lot of the things that came up, there was so much that came up, but a lot of it was also realizing, like you said, so much of the things that I internalized, that were harmful to other Black children. And a lot of those things are things that I was still weaponizing against myself too. And so in engaging that childhood part of myself, I learned a lot about how I engage with Black children in general. And so those things came up. In writing through that, I'm talking to those parts of me, with the gentleness that we just talked about, and with that understanding, and trying to be as least punitive as possible as those things come up, is really what I was just trying to do. And so I think it's still a process. Like, I don't think I'm healed through the harmful things that I carry, uh, in particular how I engage Black children. But that process of working through, and engaging with my those parts of myself, have allowed me to see things that I would have never even seen before, and to heal through them in ways that were primarily have been helpful for myself, because like I said, I do use those things to weaponize against myself, but have also helped me to heal through how I engage with other Black children.
I love that. And I know earlier you mentioned how a part of that work is engaging with Black children, actual Black children. And I remember I didn't have this word obviously when I was teaching middle school, but I remember that I didn't realize like how much I had to work through with my relationship to Black children, how that was related to whatever I was holding against myself. But now, like having this language from your book and thinking back on that experience, I was like, I can see why I was, had this tug of war with like trying to empathize with my students and hold
Mm-hmm.
space for whatever it was they were triggering in me. So yeah, I'm just super thankful for what you offered me in this.
I wanted to say I also agree with you. Like, I have also had kind of resistance with older adults in my life with the way that I think children should be treated and the way that they think children should be treated. And so it's just kind of like, I think for me, I am always very conscious about what I needed as a child. And even now as an adult, I'm trying to be conscious about giving myself what was denied to me when I was younger. So I
Mm-hmm.
think in that way too, I kind of try to do some inner child work, try to dismantle a bit of misafropedia that I'm still internalizing.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. Like giving yourself, even if you're not just speaking to yourself or writing to yourself, giving yourself the space that to exist in your childhood freely, or the childhood aspects that come up, and being gentle with those things.
Mhm.
Being gentle with the things that come up because of trauma that's unresolved, and trying to care for those parts of yourself. That's ultimately what inner child work is. And so it can look like a variety of different things for different people. But yeah, that's been so central to, I think, when you put it in those terms, like I think that that's so central to the healing work we all need to do. And I think it's obvious, that we have to be loving to those parts of ourselves in order to be free.
Yes. So I wanted to ask a question about liberation. So you wrote in your book, I wanted to ask how she could find liberation in a belief system that puts the onus of eradicating anti-Blackness on those who are destroyed by it, that asks that they achieve excellence by skillfully overlooking their own destruction. So one, yes. Two, I have been thinking a lot about our roles in liberation. I've been thinking about, like, when I was younger, I used to really believe that in order to reach liberation, like, we have to go and educate a lot of people who are harming us. And so I have really been trying to find that balance between like taking care of myself, because putting myself in those harmful spaces harms me, but also like, how do we make sure that we all move forward? And so I'm kind of torn, because for me, I feel like we should probably be looking past these systems. Or I'll use one example. Like, I know a lot of Black people believe the way to liberation is educating white people. And so for
Mm-hmm.
me, I'm kind of past the idea that white people need to be educated to reach my own liberation. So I'm like, is it space for both of us? Is there a way for some people to maybe educate white people or whatever, but then for the rest of us to look past that and to try to imagine a world where we can all reach liberation?
Yeah, well, that's such a great question. Um, and that line was written about my mother after she experienced some racism in the Hare Krishna temple. She like wrote her guru, and he basically was telling her to, don't make it your problem. That if they were racist, that's on them, and uh, basically telling them to just ignore it,
Yeah.
in a way, which is a lot of what we all do, and we have to walk this line, living in a white supremacist world of how much do we engage, um, versus how much do we push back against, and like you say, how much do we try to educate people outside of. outside of our experiences on, you know, how to treat us well. And so I'm in the boat you're in of like, I know that for me in particular, it's not my job to educate white people. I'm I think I'm evolving on what that means for other people. I think ultimately, like, your work can't be done for white people, um, and still be freeing for us. Like, it just, I don't think that that's possible. But I do think that there is a possible world where a person could, you know, that could be one avenue that they're using to do their work for Black people. But I also know that for sure that's not me. Um, I think it gets, and I think for a lot of people who are doing that work, it's not for them either, because what ends up happening is they're using this energy that they could be using to love up on Black people, and to create different relationships with Black people and create different relationships with themselves, and giving that energy to white people, in a way that's usually wasted because it's very hard to teach white people things. So yeah, I don't know. I think I don't think that, I find more and more these days that I have less like clear one size fits all answers to things. And I think you got to take a lot of these situations, um, and contextualize them based on what that specific situation is. But I know that for me and my work, that's not something that I can do. And I also know that ultimately we need to be working on how we engage with ourselves, in different ways. And so I think we can all do better to invest more energy that way, um, versus, you know, trying to teach someone else how to engage with us.
Yes, I love something that you just said, and it reminded me of what Kesse Lehman told me when I was like 2021. And I believe he told you this too, Danny, was to stop writing to white people. And it completely changed the way that I approached my writing, because instead of giving all this energy to making sure that white people or men or just anyone who was oppressing me, instead of making sure that they could understand where I was and try to empathize, I spent that energy like redirecting it towards me and really centering like what did I need to hear when I was younger.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this goes back to that inner child work too. But redirecting that energy to like what did I need to hear? What did my friends need to hear? What did, all of the Black people that I grew up with, what did we need to hear? And
Mm-hmm.
redirecting my writing towards that. So yes, thank you
Yeah.
for that.
Yeah, and if white people learn things from that, then that's, I guess that's great. But I think that they can, and that's why I was kind of hesitant to give a clear answer about white people in particular, because I think there is a lot of work that white people can do to learn, from the ways that we engage with each other. But I think they learn it even better when we're not, you know, catering to them, because they have to do work to decenter themselves that I think is necessary for them to do, if they are actually going to evolve in the first place. Um, so yeah, I think doing that work specifically for ourselves and for each other, and whatever happens beyond that, allowing that, to not take us away from doing that work, is really important.
Yeah, I agree. I got past that in college, that uphill battle with white people. So I really love your essay, My Gender is Black, which is on Afropunk, which we'll link in the description box, but it's also a revised version in the memoir. Because I think they're different, and the one in memoir is longer.
Hmm.
But so what you discuss in that essay mirrors like a few clumsy conversations I've been having with my friends, mostly as I try to understand my own relationship to gender. And so there's like two quotes in this that really stood out to me. The first was Blackness ruptures the laws of gender, just like the laws of the state seem intent on rupturing Black life. And then gender identity under whiteness is a tool, not an end. How do we get to that? How do we get to that end, that world in which all of our genders or lack thereof aren't used as the basis for our inhumane treatment? That is the question. So for myself, my shift in relationship to my own gender is connected to my spiritual journey as much as it is connected to my inner child work that I'm trying to do. And so you center children in this conversation as well, which makes sense when we think about like the ways the gender we were assigned is like violently enforced in childhood, whether it's through our parents, school, the doctor. And so I'm interested to know how or if this idea of blackness is not separate from but wrapped up in our gender, how we articulate our gender, and has that been impacted, or is it a part of your spiritual journey, like because this it's something similar that I've heard people echo, that like blackness is queer and our genders have always been queer because we've never had access to the binaries in particular ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very central. I mean, to me, my spiritual journey is about how I understand myself in relation to the world, in relation to my people, in relation to my healing. And so everything that is a part of that is a part of my healing and is a part of understanding how I relate to the world and the earth and my people is very very central to that. And so obviously, I think my gender and figuring out what that is has been a really big part of that. And as I've learned different ways of relating to myself and my people, like that's come hand in hand with learning different ways of relating to my gender. I think the way we move through gender says a lot about how we where we are in relation to our communities. So yeah, for me, that has definitely been a huge part of my spiritual journey. As I get further along my spiritual journey, I find that I'm learning a lot more about gender and vice versa. Um, and it's in every. I think the way that I think about my gender, I'm able to see it in more in everything that I'm doing. Not because everything has to be about gender and has to be about the ways that I'm trying to reject it, but I think the ways that we are socialized around gender just show up in everything. Like it's part of how the white supremacy works, um, and it's enforced by so many different things, as you were inferring earlier. Um, so yeah, that was a roundabout way of just saying yes. It's a part of my spiritual journey.
Well, before we wrap up, obviously there was so much that we couldn't even touch on. And like this is a book that I feel like, well, I know is like a part of my, like a model for me in a lot of ways. And so it's probably going to be one of those books I have to revisit every year, as I work through whatever I'm working through. And so, yeah, I just want to tell you thank you for that and ask if you had any other final thoughts about anything we talked about or didn't touch on, in relation to hoodoo and inner child work and that kind of thing.
No, thank you all so much. This was a really great conversation. It felt really beautiful, and I'm so glad to have been here. I'm such a fan of y'all's podcast,
Thank you.
and I learned so much listening to you. So it's just really exciting to be a part of it.
Yes. Thank you for joining. I did have a personal question. Did you have like any resistance to writing a memoir so young?
Yeah, especially at first. Like I think once I started the process, I kind of had gotten over it by that point. Um, but yeah, I heard things like no one under 30 should ever be writing a memoir, and there are lots of good reasons, I guess, that people might feel that way. But what is a memoir? Is an exploration of life,
Hmm.
and um, I realized that, especially when thinking through the ways that we think about childhood and Black children and what's valuable. um, basically that's saying that, you know, our childhoods and the way that we perceive things as younger people is not valuable, and there's nothing other people can learn from that. And I know that
Mm.
that's not true. And so once I put it in those terms, like, of course these experience, and that's what the book is about. Of course, these experiences and my perception of them as someone who's younger is valuable. And it might change later. The book that if I were to write this book at 60, it would be a different book.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't mean that it's a better or a worse book, but I think both of those perspectives are really important, and the perspectives of younger people on their lives need to be shared more often. I wish that, you know, we could have kids writing memoirs, because that would be a whole different genre as well. That would give us a lot of insight. So yeah, once I put it in those terms, I kind of was like, no, that doesn't really make sense. But initially, yeah, I did have a lot of those fears. Um, it kind of felt like a little presumptuous to do that. And then, I mean, as I move along my spiritual journey, another thing that I'm finding is that I give myself a lot more space to be presumptuous and to just assert myself, and um, to be okay with saying, you know, the things that I know are valuable and the ways that I show up is valuable. And so yeah, that's pretty much where I was when I started the book.
Okay. Yes. Thank you
I
for
love
that.
that. One thing that Kiese has said to me, but I think that he said like publicly maybe, is that you don't have to write just one memoir. Like you can write one, you can write multiple types of memoirs. And I think he said that because we were having a conversation how I still go through this even though I'm about to be 29, is that I always feel like I'm too young to like, or I don't have the range to grapple with some of the ideas that I'm thinking about, especially when I read his work and other people's work. And I'm like, I just don't have the range for this. And so I definitely think it's connected to that, what people have told us about how you need to be like older and a more whatever comes with age or is supposed to come with age. And
Yeah,
I think about that all the time, and it stays in my head like, you don't have to just, if you write in this version of yourself, it doesn't negate what who you become, and then you write whatever you write in that version of yourself. It's all valid and important. So that's how I kind
yeah,
of.
yeah, and it's to me too. I think when you think of writing as like an answer or a destination, um, then then you kind of foreclose the different possibilities of what writing can be. Like if, like you're saying, you are just grappling with things, then you know you have the range to grapple with it, even if you don't have the range to necessarily figure that out. And for me, the excitement is in the grappling. Like how am I working through this right now? And I know I can work through it in a really interesting way, because I'm the only person who can work through it from where I am. And so for me, writing is about that process. It's not necessarily about the answers that I come to, or like this, you know, I'm not tying up the message in this bow at the end. I love just grappling with shit on the page, and I can do that from whatever position that I'm in. So yeah,
Thank you, Hari, for coming and talking to us and being on the show. We really appreciate you being here.
thank you. I was, like I said, I had such a great time, and I really appreciate being invited.
Well, Leah, what are you still holding on to from this interview?
I'm holding on to so much. This was really great. I especially love the part where Hari said that Black childhood is denied from us. And even hearing their journey of how inner child work is necessary because, you know, they were never allowed to be a child. And it reminded me of this conversation I saw on Twitter where, you know, how often we say like kids are resilient and kids can bounce back, but we say these things not because they're true, but because a lot of times we don't want to acknowledge the harm that we are actively doing to kids by not acknowledging how we are harming them, by not acknowledging their pain. I remember a lot of times, I would go to my parents and I'd be like, oh, I have this problem. And they'd be like, how do you have problems? You're a child. Children don't have problems. And so, like, in adulthood, I have all of these different problems that are manifested from the fact that, like, I never got to resolve them in childhood. I was never seen as, like, you know, someone who could be hurt. Um, Something else that I loved was towards the end when Hari talked about being young and writing this memoir, and how also kids need to write memoirs because our childhood perspectives are important and should be listened to. And I feel like a lot of that is in line with our last episode with Hess, where they were talking about how Black people have been denied the ability to record our memory. And that's what memoir is, a recording of memory. And so, just how much work needs to be done, and not only listening to Black voices, but especially Black children's voices, because, like, who among Black people have not been listened to, have not been centered, have not been heard, if not for Black children? So, yes, I really love that. And I also love when you were talking about not feeling like you have the range to write memoir, and Hari kind of giving us permission because, like, it's okay to grapple with things. It's okay to not be perfect at something, because what we have to say right now in our lives matter as much as if we said it when we were like 60. Every stage of our life matters and is important. So yes, so much of this was so beautiful, and I love that Hari sat and talked to us. So what about you, Dani?
I really just love the concept of inner child work sort of being an extension of our liberation. And I love the way they emphasize the importance of that work and how it impacts the way we relate to others, especially children. And even as I kind of figure out what inner child work looks for me, one thing I'm learning is that a lot of folks treat children the way they were treated. They think of children the way they were treated, even the way people fantasize and joke about how they will discipline their children, not the time they'll spend with their children, not the relationship building, but how they're going to whoop them or whatever weird thing. And so a part of, undoing that internalized misafropedia that they talk about in the book, is really ensuring that we don't replicate that same violence that we endured with our own children or with just other children that we have to interact with. So I think that was really important, that emphasis, like the way they were writing to their childhood self and those prayers, like that was some really, um, I hate to use the term powerful, but I just feel like that's some super powerful spiritual type of like work to engage in, to really have to really face that part of yourself. And so I just really resonated, especially I resonated with the entire book, but I really resonated a lot with that. And then same with you, Leah. I really appreciated the mention of memoir writing and how people make it seem like you shouldn't be a certain age, or like, oh, you haven't lived enough to write about X, Y, and Z. Um, I think, at every stage of our life, how we make sense of the world and our relationship to it, I think it matters. And I think we should be able to articulate that journey of living at whatever stage we are at. So, yeah, I just am super thankful we got a chance to talk with them. And yeah, it was a beautiful memoir.
When I first read it, I was really interested in the religion parts of it. And it was through your questions and you questioning about the inner child work with Hari that I was like she's right. There is a lot of inner child work, and there's a lot of spiritual work in that. I believe Hari was talking about like using hoodoo as part of their inner
Mhm.
child work, and because hoodoo kind of complicates this idea of time not being linear. So you can always go back to your inner child. You can always go back and do the things that you love to do as a child. And that's been something that I'm not gonna lie, I've been struggling with trying to remember what were things that I liked to do when I was younger so that way I can do them again as an adult. And it's hard to remember because, as they said earlier, like a lot of our childhood has been denied to us. And um I don't even think a lot of us had like really developed hobbies before we were forced to become adults and be mature and know how to act and be in this world. So yeah, there's a bit of grief there too, because a lot of us have never had to acknowledge that our childhood itself is something that we've lost and something that we need to grieve. So, definitely, if you have not read this book, definitely check out Black Boy Out of Time.
Well, if you like this episode, you can like, rate, and review Hoodoo Plant Mamas on Apple Podcasts. We are now at 25-star ratings. Wow.
Yes, thank y'all for the 5 stars. If anything from the show resonated with you, make sure to share it with us on social media. You can find us on Twitter at Hoodoo Plants and Instagram at Hoodoo Plant Mamas. Stay tuned for our next episode. Bye, y'all.